This is Josh Belk. I appreciate you taking a few moments to listen in once again today to the Belk on Business podcast. Today we're going to talk a little bit about leading and responding in crisis. I actually think I may have recorded a podcast once before talking specifically about leading during crisis. But during this last week, I had sat down, and I'm going to take an aside here just for a moment. I think it's essential for any of us who really want to take steps toward elevating ourselves and becoming high and peak performers to making sure that we have those necessary habits in our daily lives, that we're paying purposeful attention to the emotional and spiritual and physical needs that we each of us have. And I think probably for most of us, the best time to do that is probably first thing in the morning. I know for myself that spending a few moments when I get up in the morning, making sure that nutritionally I'm taken care of with a healthy breakfast. I'm not eating a donut, but I'm actually something that provides the nutrients and the protein that I need, and spend some time addressing the spiritual side of life, which I think is maybe most of all important, and then the physical side as well. With the workout routine and whatnot, we find ourselves find ourselves able to perform better throughout the day when we do those types of things. But during the spiritual moments that I take in the morning, I'd run across a passage in Scripture, and as I began to think about this throughout that day and over the next day, there was a couple resounding thoughts that kind of came away from that, and I jotted those down. And actually last night before going to bed, my wife and I were spending a few minutes just talking through, and we rarely ever talk about the podcast, but the podcast had come up, and I had shared a thought that I'd run across, and she actually added something that I'm going to bring into this podcast as I go through today. So talking a little bit about leading and responding in crisis. And I was reading the story of Jacob. You're going to find this in Genesis chapter 42, verse number 1. The story of Jacob is there was a famine in the land. And of course, this is something now in the United States we generally don't deal with. Food is plentiful, but of course, it's an agricultural society primarily. But there was a famine in the land. There wasn't the adequate rain. They did not have the technology, obviously, that we do now to be able to kind of help if we are going through a drought type season. But they're having a severe famine in the land. People are starving. There are some serious issues. As you read through this passage, you'll see that Jacob looks at his sons and basically says to them, "Why are you standing here looking at each other? Why are you standing here doing nothing?" Jacob knew and thought that, and we can only assume that his sons would know that there was food in Egypt. They had adequate finances to be able to go and get food. It's just that nobody was acting. So Jacob here, he's frustrated. He looks at his sons and he says, "What in the world are you doing standing around?" I don't know if you're a business owner, sometimes you may look around and you just may not see people. You look around and you just don't see people performing. Wondering, what in the world is going on? Why are we standing around looking at each other, not solving the problems that need to be solved? I think this can be true in our own households as well. I think it's even applicable here to a dad with 12 sons. First didn't take a look at himself, but immediately just kind of want to look at his sons and begin to maybe just kind of just vent in frustration instead of looking at himself and saying, well, what should I have done better? What could I do better as it relates to leadership during a time of crisis? And so through the story, we eventually find out that he does end up sending 9 of his 11 sons. Of course, the one son, Joseph, is already in Egypt, and then he keeps Benjamin, the youngest son, at home. And eventually goes there, and of course the story plays out that the brothers end up meeting the brother they did not realize was there, and it's kind of a neat story. Now, every business, and we in life as well, but every business we will face times of crisis. Jacob was very much known to be a go-getter. My wife actually brought this to my attention last night, that Jacob, when he was younger, he was known as a trickster. He was a guy that manipulated for his own benefit. It was just kind of who he was character-wise. However, he was a person that definitely thought through problems, didn't always solve them the best way, but definitely thought through problems and was a person of action. He didn't sit around and blame others. He went and literally he went out and he solved problems. And like I said, not always, mostly the most ethical of ways, but he was a problem solver and a person of action. But we saw after his wife passed away, they became very complacent. And Rachel, this lady he had worked 14 years for, to be able to marry this lady, ends up passing away, and we see some complacency set in, and I don't know if this complacency ended up kind of trickling down into his sons, and maybe it was out of complacency that they didn't act. Okay, but whatever the case may be, we see that Jacob wasn't quite the same performer, the person of action as he was at one point. We see the sons are getting complacent and they just don't want to leave their comfort zone. So and through this we see a dad that ends up getting frustrated, a leader that ends up getting frustrated. Now this particular crisis was not a man-made crisis, but there is always a man-made response to any crisis. In right now in our country, we're dealing with kind of a little bit of an ongoing crisis with this ongoing COVID-19 situation, with this coronavirus situation, and every single one of us has been impacted in a different way. And some people choose to blame others, even politically. We had a presidential candidate blaming the prior president, and we have politicians blaming each other for not having the right type of response. Okay. However, we did see a response, and I think there is some good coming from those responses. Okay, but when we see in this story here that there was not a response by the followers, and the leader did not adequately give the fellowship what they needed as it relates to the proper thinking skills. So I'm going to just mention three things as far as in leading and responding in crisis. First of all, we should always be planning for a crisis. And crisis always comes. We see economically that essentially we see the economic cycle work in cycles. Okay, our businesses will go in cycles. We'll have time of plenty. We'll have time where things are a little bit scarce. And we should always be kind of saving for that rainy day, planning for that rainy day, planning for that crisis that if we aren't in it now, eventually it will come. This may include a savings plan, a succession plan in our business, some sort of a survival plan. We look at this personally. I mean, do we have our will? Do we have these elements in place, a trust, whatever it is that we need to have in place to make sure that we're planning for that time of crisis? We may not be there for the crisis. It may be our own death. Okay, but the people that are behind that have to kind of clean up the mess or address the situation, have we planned adequately for the crisis that is to come? In our business, if times are really good right now, are we adequately saving for the time where business may not be as good? We may not be as profitable. We may even go through a time that we're losing money, that we're still able to keep our doors open, still able to take care of the people that work for us, but making sure that as leaders, we are planning for that crisis that is to come. Secondly, develop a team with critical thinking skills. And this really is a process of being able to teach our team on how do we think. And so it should have been obvious, okay, to the followers what needed to be done. It really probably should have been obvious to the leader on that process of teaching. Okay, we're in a time of crisis. What needs to happen? Okay, and we see in the story that was not done. Okay, so the solution should have been obvious. It was obvious to the leader, but the followers didn't see it. They may have reacted or simply did not react at all. Maybe it was out of fear. I don't know what kind of a father that Jacob was. Maybe he was a very kind of a mean and obnoxious person and a demeaning person. And kind of look at ourselves as leaders when one of our employees or team members come to us. Are we getting on their case right away? Okay, or do we use every single one of those situations as an opportunity to teach, to inform, to walk them through a process? Okay, but whatever the case was, we see in the story that they did not react. Okay, they didn't respond appropriately. They just didn't do anything, and it may have been out of fear. They may not have been taught, or it may have just simply been they were complacent. Everything is just fine. The leader will take care of it. It's his responsibility, and they just chose to just kind of sit back and not do anything at all. The story doesn't necessarily tell us, okay, but we can kind of think through situations that maybe our team didn't respond or we didn't respond. Okay, and why didn't we respond? Why didn't our team respond? Okay, was it out of fear? Was it out of complacency? Okay, or they just simply didn't know. Okay, but whatever the situation, we have to look at ourselves as leaders and realize that the problem ultimately is ours, and we need to going forward, making sure that we teach our team how to respond in crisis and how to make decisions. Lastly, number 3, involve our team members in the decision-making process. And so this is a process of explaining the why and the how. Okay, the why is always the vision. Okay, and so if the vision is clear and we have a buy-in by our team, the decision-making process will be a lot simpler to them. Okay, but we need to explain to them and involve them in the decision-making process. And so you bring them in, and once a decision has to get made, you explain to them, well, this is the why of the decision, and this is the process that I made to be able to make the decision. And once the team has the buy-in on the vision, they understand and they buy into your leadership and they understand the decision-making process, then when that time of crisis comes, or that time of when a difficult decision needs to be made, that the team understands, hey, you know what, this is how the leader would have made the decision, even though he may not be here, or you know what, I don't even need to involve him necessarily. We can make this decision and be able to solve whether it's a problem in the business, to be able to solve a client's issue that we may be dealing with. But either way, to allow that business to be able to move forward in a way that is not only profitable, okay, but really can really bring value to the clients, and to be able to serve those in which you want to serve, and be able to fulfill the why of the business and of those that work within the business. Speaking of value, I hope this podcast brought you some value. If you haven't already, I would strongly encourage you to subscribe to the podcast. I appreciate you taking a few moments out of your schedule to listen in. Have a wonderful day.